After 4 months of war, the U.S. and Iran have announced an initial agreement calling for a 60-day ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The conflict has brought shipping through the waterway to a virtual standstill, triggering a global energy crisis. Now, the U.S.-Iranian deal is scheduled to take effect on Friday and promises to get oil and gas flowing again. World leaders have cautiously welcomed the agreement, despite a dearth of details.
US President Donald Trump emerges from Air Force One, appearing to be one step closer to a peace deal with Iran. Trump hailed the agreement on social media, writing that it would reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Few details of the initial agreement are public, but mediators Pakistan are calling it a historic milestone.
This is not just an agreement between two countries, Mr. Speaker, but a victory for peace and dialogue. It is a success of diplomacy and a termination of war.
As part of the framework agreement, the US would lift the blockade on Iran's ports, and Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Fighting would stop for 60 days. But each side offers its own perspective on the deal. Iranian officials say there might be a charge for using the Strait of Hormuz.
We have always maintained that we do not seek to collect transit tolls, but we will design and collect the necessary fees for the services we provide. Navigation services, environmental protection, possibly ship insurance, and other services that will be provided by Iran and Oman. So the issue is very clear in this regard.
Iran also insists that the ceasefire applies to Lebanon too. Fighting broke out between the Iran-backed militia Hezbollah and Israel after the US-Israeli strikes on Iran 4 months ago. Since then, thousands of people have been killed in Lebanon and many more displaced. European leaders highlight the challenges ahead.
The task now is to implement the agreement with determination. The Strait of Hormuz must be kept permanently and unrestrictedly open to free shipping. Further negotiations in the coming weeks must ensure that Iran verifiably and permanently ends its military nuclear program. The agreement must also hold in Lebanon. We saw once again yesterday just how important that is.
The issues that the Iranian regime has fought hardest for, its nuclear program and an end to sanctions, are not believed to be part of this initial agreement. The toughest negotiations may still be ahead.
And joining me now is Fawaz Gerges, a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics. Professor, it's good to see you again. What are we talking about here? We can't really call it a full peace plan. It's not a nuclear plan. It's not a military plan for Iran. How do you describe what the U.S. and Iran have agreed upon?
If there are 3 words to describe the framework, is the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz. Opening the Strait of Hormuz for shipping in return for lifting America's blockades of Iran's ports, and also the beginning, kicking the thorniest questions, the most difficult questions down the road to the second phase, which will include about 60 days. Let me compare 2 statements, one by President Trump and another by Iran's foreign minister, to give our viewers a glimpse of what we're talking about. President Trump last night said, "Ships of the world, start your engines and let the oil flow." President Trump was celebrating a diplomatic victory, returned to the pre-war status quo, because the Strait of Hormuz was open. Compare President Trump's celebration of return to the status quo with Iran's foreign minister, and I'm quoting what Iran's foreign minister said. He said, quote unquote, "Our sword hangs over the Strait of Hormuz." Again, Iran celebrating a major political and economic victory a byproduct of the US and the Israel war on the 28th of February. So here we are. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, and everything else will be discussed later on. Very difficult, very complex, very sensitive. I doubt it very much whether we could see a breakthrough in 60 days on Iran's nuclear program or other thorny questions.
You know that there is little to practically no trust between Iran and the U.S. They violated agreements before. What is there to give us confidence that this deal will even hold 60 days?
Well, I think because both sides have a vested interests in basically ending the state of war between each other. Both sides do not really want back to renew hostilities. Both sides are afraid that repeated clashes in the past few weeks could have triggered either miscalculation or renewed hostilities. Iran is hurting a great deal. America's blockade on Iran's port basically has taken a heavy toll in terms of huge unemployment, in terms of poverty, in terms of inflation, in terms of collapse of its currency. Also, Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has taken its toll, not only on the world economy, but also on the US economy. Inflation is very high, doubled in the past 3 months. American consumers are paying much more than they used to for gas and shopping lists. The war is very unpopular in the United States. Midterm elections are coming up in the United States.
True.
So all in all, both sides want to cut their losses and move on. The question, the challenge facing both sides is that their differences are huge. Could they really basically bridge their differences on Iran's nuclear program, on Iran's desire to basically charge a toll for managing the Strait of Hormuz, on whether Israel will ever accept a ceasefire in Lebanon? Already Israel rejected the ceasefire in Lebanon, and I want to tell your viewers that Israel has been bombing Lebanon today. It has killed one person, injured a journalist, and basically Israel's defense minister has made it very clear his forces will remain in a huge security zone in Lebanon and Gaza and Syria.
As you say, Professor, Israel is certainly not happy with this agreement. They were not at the negotiating table, yet they are supposed to end the fighting in Lebanon. Does it strike you that this deal puts Israel and Hezbollah in the same boat, the ones who were not consulted?
Well, Hezbollah has already accepted the ceasefire. In fact, Hezbollah has ceased any military activities at midnight last night, and basically congratulated Iran on this particular peace deal or framework, and said that Hezbollah will honor the deal, but it will not allow Israel freedom of action and bombing southern Lebanon. So if Israel is bombing Lebanon, if Israel decides to stay in Lebanon and basically bomb Lebanon as it has, I expect hostilities to return today, not tomorrow. And this really, again, could implode the ceasefire by the United States and Iran. And the question is, will President Trump be able and willing to exert pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu? Keep in mind here, the political future of Benjamin Netanyahu and his political legacy is online. This is a disaster, a nightmare for Benjamin Netanyahu. That's very much everyone in Israel doubts whether Benjamin Netanyahu will basically cut his losses and pull out his forces from Lebanon, because that really would mean the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's both political legacy and political election, because elections are coming up in the next few months in Israel.
Let me pull this back before we run out of time to Iran's nuclear program, the economic sanctions. I mean, these are huge issues. They're being pushed into late August, September at the earliest. What has to happen in the interim for the U.S. and Iran to even get to the point where they can address these hard issues?
I mean, as you said, Brent, when you started, it's all about rebuilding trust. And we know that trust cannot be built in 60 days or 60 months, right? And also about honoring the ceasefire agreement, the framework, in terms of allowing shipping to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, in terms of America's basically lifting its blockade on Iran's ports, in order also in the promises to release some of Iran's frozen assets because Iran is hurting very much. So we have to wait and see. And that's why it's a long, basically toll. And I'm very skeptical, even though I hope I am wrong. I hope both sides could find ways and means to bridge their differences and reach, a lasting peace deal.
Professor Gerges, it's always good to have you on, good to get your take on these developing story issues. Thank you.
Thanks.
And let's bring in now Daniel Gerlach. He is Middle East analyst and editor-in-chief of Zenith and a familiar face to our viewers. Good to see you again, Daniel. This is still, of course, a framework agreement. What do you make of what we've learned about it so far?
Well, the negotiations will go on. It's a positive sign that there is another 60 days of time that the conflict parties have bought. That means that probably President Trump can have the World Cup in the United States without any bad news about war at the Strait of Hormuz. But the ultimate issues are not being solved. So Trump can felicitate, can boast that he has solved the problem which he himself created, but that is about it. And then we will see the devil is in the detail. I think for the Iranian regime, it's a golden opportunity to gain a legitimacy with the United States that they could never dream to have before February this year. On the other side, if you look at the stock market and the oil price, then certainly there is a certain degree of accomplishment with the United States. Other than that, a lot of foreign policy experts, observers in America, in Israel, in Europe, and most importantly in the Gulf region with the imminent neighbors of Iran, there's a lot of criticism and skepticism.
For Trump, what do you think, to your point, what do you think will be the measure of whether or not this is a good deal or an admission of defeat?
There's not going to be an admission of defeat. That is impossible. That's impossible according to the U.S. narrative, but also, we should check the propaganda of all sides. The Iranian regime claims that it has imposed a major victory on its enemies, on the United States. But of course, Iran has taken a lot of hitting. Iran has lost parts of its military capability, its deterrence. So Iran was basically economically suffocating, and Iran also had an interest in signing a deal, opening the Strait of Hormuz, being able to export its own oil, and probably also get sanctions relief. This was essential for the Iranians, and I think they had much higher interest and stakes in this than it appears. But the American side is not going to admit any defeat. How should they? So I think for America, Trump is the president of a superpower. How would he admit any defeat in front of a middle power like Iran? And the United States haven't been badly affected and hit. Iran has, and let's bear that power relationship in mind. What I find very interesting in the propaganda of the Iranian regime today, they have managed to somehow downgrade, and I'm emphasizing in propaganda terms, to downgrade Israel to the status of a proxy of the United States. Remember, Iran has proxies in the region, proxy militias like Hezbollah, and when Iran does a deal, it does it also on behalf of these groups. Now, what the Iranians have introduced a logic according to which the Americans are also signing deals on behalf of Israel, which downgrades Israel to the same level of a regional proxy of the United States. Of course, that does not reflect the power relationship because Israel is taking its own decisions and it's extremely powerful. But in propaganda terms, Iran has achieved a great deal in front of the Israelis.
So, then tell me what you think here. If the goal of Trump and of the United States was to weaken the regime, has that been achieved in your view, or do you think that ultimately what might come out of this is a stronger Iranian regime?
We're dealing with a different regime today, and I think it might be an optical illusion that the regime is stronger. That's what the regime would tell you. And of course, Iran has remained steadfast and has made some strategic victories. But also, I think the regime at the moment is a bit on steroids. It hasn't collapsed. It has been transformed, but it also has a lot of internal power struggles. How could it be different after these radical changes that started with the assassination of more than 30, let's say, members of the political class, including the supreme leader? So the regime is transformed and the regime is changing, and I don't think it's very sustainable. The question is this kind of arrangement sustainable? Because as far as Iran is concerned, of course, it has more clout and influence over the Strait of Hormuz, and it has gained legitimacy, but it has also lost parts of its deterrent force because it has shown and demonstrated what it is able to do and what it is not able to do. And to what extent that is going to impress regional players, let alone the United States, remains to be seen.
A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is part of the ceasefire deal. It's one of the conditions. How difficult do you think it's going to be to achieve and maintain that, especially on the part of, the United States exerting pressure on Israel to do so and Iran exerting its pressure on Hezbollah?
Well, of course, Israel is not a proxy of the United States, like Hezbollah would be a proxy of Iran. As I said before, there's a symmetrical relationship, but the Iranians assume, because they don't want to directly engage with Israel, that the Americans are responsible for Israeli action. So Israel's prime minister has a great deal of margin to sabotage and destroy the deal by not complying with it. And the Israeli government has made it clear that it's willing to remain in the south, that it's not going to withdraw from Lebanese territory, regardless what Americans and Iranians are negotiating or signing up to on Friday. And so for Iran, there are two options. One is like silently remove Lebanon from the equation, make compromise on the equation on Lebanon with the Americans, and say, for our national interests and for the interests of the survival of the regime, it's more important to strike a deal about the Strait of Hormuz and to make sure that the Americans release our assets and give us sanctions relief than hanging on to Lebanon. Because the Lebanon issue, of course, provides Iran with leverage, but it also provides it with a huge burden when it comes to this deal making with the Americans. And Israel, the Israeli government, knows how to exploit this.
Assuming that this deal stays on track and that the Strait of Hormuz is indeed reopened, what do you think, changes for this waterway and, the influences upon it going forward?
I think we've observed an over-reliance on the Strait of Hormuz from the perspectives of the Europeans, but also of other players in terms of connectivity, trade, flight connections. Everything was basically directed through the Gulf states. That is probably going to change. I think there will be, the Europeans in particular will try to open complementary, not alternative, but complementary trade routes and routes of energy supply. We have seen that the shortage of, for example, fertilizers that were some of which were exclusively produced in the Gulf will have a detrimental impact on economies, in particular in the third world. So I think we will also see some sort of alternative or complementary production there. And we will see that the Gulf states in particular will try to reroute their energy exports, partly overland. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates have opened a pipeline to Fujairah in order to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. So the strategic value of the Strait of Hormuz will remain, but I think we will see a greater appetite of regional powers to diversify their trade and connectivity routes, not to fall into that same trap again.
Daniel Gerlach, editor-in-chief of Zenith. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.